Every week, out of the United Nations or one of its agencies or some other international organization, there pours forth a cornucopia of reports. For example, just last week, there came a report from the investigative team mandated by the UN Human Rights Council to investigate the behavior of the Myanmar army towards the Rohingyas. And they came to the conclusion that the combination of murder and torture and sexual violence amounted to a genocidal intent. And then there was another report from something called the Global Preparedness Monitoring Group, which is a kind of coalition between the World Health Organization and the World Bank, designed to look at the possibility of another pandemic sweeping the world. And they make the point that if there was another pandemic, let us say even a flu, we're simply unprepared, and the casualties and consequences would be calamitous. Now, without diminishing for one iota those two documents, I was particularly taken by a report from UNESCO, the UN Education Agency, which indicated, after careful analysis, that there are 260 million children between the ages of 6 and 17 out of school, and that some 12 million of them may never enter school at any time during their young lives. And that total number represents 15 to 20% of all the children in the 6 to 17 age category on the planet. Now, interestingly and disturbingly enough, those figures haven't come down in the last several years. They've largely been stagnating. And naturally, the greatest concentration is in sub-Saharan Africa, and naturally, the greatest concentration is amongst young girls. As a matter of fact, as you rise to the age of 17, more and more of the girls are absent from school. So what brought us to this pass? Well, essentially a combination of conflict and refugee status and poverty and being a girl, because the endemic quality of gender inequality is everywhere evident. So are there consequences that are palpable? Well, obviously. Take a look at HIV, for example. We know that there are more than 6,000 new infections every week amongst young women and girls, and if you want to bring that rate down, then young girls have to know how to protect themselves from transmission. And the way you know how to protect yourself is to be in school, particularly secondary school, to learn it. You're out of school, transmission continues, as we've seen. Well, is there anything that can be done about it? Absolutely, there is an obvious solution. If the wealthy world were to meet the target that was set 50 years ago by agreement for foreign aid, for what we call official development assistance, then there'd be enough money to put all these kids into school. But unfortunately, the target, it's expressed arithmetically as 0.7% of gross national product. If the target were met, it would be wonderful, but it's only met by a handful of nations, mostly the Nordics. Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, sometimes Holland, sometimes Luxembourg, sometimes the United Kingdom, but the great majority of countries never meet it. Canada gives 0.26 of GNP, roughly a third of what's needed. The United States is 0.19, roughly a quarter of what's needed. It's dismal, it's pathetic, it's outrageous. You see, the problem is not a lack of solution. The problem is a lack of commitment, a lack of urgency, and a lack of leadership. It was ever thus. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.